think we'll need a mic tonight. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, David, it's great to have you here tonight. Thank you for being here. So I'll let Dave, we want to keep it relatively casual tonight, more relaxed, kind of like a fireside chat. So I'll let David kind of briefly introduce himself and, you know, where he got to, why China, how he got to where he is now, and yeah, I'll let David introduce himself.
Okay, well, thank you, Victoria. Thanks, Juco, for the introduction, and a great venue for our event tonight. Look, I guess my China story goes back. As a child, I used to look at the map of the world, and I'd always be curious about China. I had this vision of it always being this lovely green country. And as I grew, I sort of just got interested, and I decided I'd like to travel there. Before I left university, I travelled around Asia, India, Indonesia, so forth, and including China, and something about China called me back. I was fascinated by it. It wasn't necessarily the most interesting, it was as interesting as all the rest, but there's something that called me back. And after I ended up, my career started at the Treasury in Canberra, Australian Commonwealth Treasury. I had an economist, I graduated as an economist in university, and I specialized. Yeah, you're the only one, including in this room, including me, that would choose the Treasury. And I was on the China desk, so I was essentially at that time, and this really speaks to where Australia's relationship with China has gone. I was the China guy, whereas now there would be there'd be an army in Treasury looking at the economy. But I took a leave of absence in '93 after 3 years in Canberra, and went to learn language at the Beijing Language Institute. I was there for a couple of weeks, got a job in a market research company that was owned by DataQuest at that point, big US company. And I took the job, and I wrote back to Treasury. I said, I'm not coming back. I just loved it. I was just completely enthralled. At the time of my life, the first 2 years, that first job, we were servicing IBM, Microsoft, all the big Sun Micro systems. And these companies are all operating out of hotels' rooms. They were just starting there. They had no idea. The rules were undefined, and they were trying to figure their way. So we were helping them on the research side.
What year was that?
That was '93. I arrived in China in September of '93. I did that for a few years. It was fascinating. Then jumped over to Deloitte in corporate finance. Did a lot of investment facilitation, joint venture setup, the whole 9 yards, feasibility studies. And of course it was so raw. These big US and European corporations, Australian companies, were asking really fundamental advice. So to me that was like boot camp for doing business in China, because as they were learning the basics, I got the opportunity. And really the company law per se, as it was in China at the time, was just being figured out. We all know the laws in China. It initially goes forth as sort of an idea, and it was sort of socialised. And eventually, after a period of sort of informal research, I'll call it, it gets passed as a law. So we were sort of a part of that process, and it was hardcore, because you're working for a firm like Deloitte. You're supposed to give really robust advice, but fundamentally the environment doesn't allow you to give that sort of advice. So I guess you learn skills in that sort of environment. A couple of years later, just sort of fast forwarding, I got divorced, came back to Sydney briefly, went back up, and some of my previous colleagues from Deloitte, through that time I was at Deloitte, we had the dot-com boom, early 2000s, a lot of consultants were jumping out, starting startups, and it just didn't sort of get me at all. I wasn't interested entrepreneurially at that point. But several years later, I was working in Wuhan for a property developer, as you do, and one of my former Deloitte colleagues gave me a call, and he said, David, look, we're thinking of buying the rights to Subway in Beijing, and we want to find someone to be general manager and run it. Do you know anyone? And I had an epiphany. He finished that sentence, the light went on, I said, I'll do it. I'll come up, I'll do it. I'm completely in. And I knew at that point that was my path. It was a completely galvanising moment. Some people have these epiphanies, some don't. I did. I hadn't had an entrepreneurial bent up until that point. My first job was with the government. But I went up, I invested my own money, I became partners with a couple of guys. We got the rights, we bought out the previous operator, and we operated Subway in Beijing. There was about 30 restaurants, mainly franchisee. We owned 2 of them. We ended up doing some good work over a couple of years. We took volumes up, got good franchisees, systemised, so forth. It was a lot of fun. I ended up having a dispute with those 2 initial partners. They wanted to grow slow, I wanted to get investment and grow quick. So we figured it out I sold out to them. Subway called me and they said, we like your work, we want you to go to Shanghai and start down there for us. So I went down to Shanghai. I was very fortunate to meet someone that ended up becoming really an angel investor, Frank Krasavec, an American businessman in the US. He agreed to back me. We went out, we raised $3 million US, and we started what is now Dash Brands. So I founded it, I went out and approached him, but he really was, I guess, the anchor investor. And that sort of over the years, we built Subway up. Subway wasn't willing to give us national rights. They were never going to let us do an IPO. They wanted most of the stores to be franchise owned. Fred DeLuca was a tough guy to do business with. So we eventually decided to move on from Subway and we got the rights for Domino's. And Domino's has really become our key partner. We now have, as in the introduction, I think it's 135 restaurants now. By the end of the year, it'll be 175. We've raised well over 100 million US. We're operating in Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, Suzhou, Tianjin. We have national rights. We'll soon open in the south. So I built that business over the first few years. I had a medical issue, forced me to step back. So I stepped back from the executive role. And then since then, I was vice chairman for a number of years. And then earlier this year, I stepped off the board of Domino's because of my new business venture. I felt I'd run the course, so over 11 years I wanted to do something new. So I had a great experience with that. I've started a new business called Freedom Road Travel. I founded that 3 years ago in Shanghai. We have an office in Shanghai. We now have acquired a travel agency business in Australia and a digital marketing agency in Australia. We have offices in Brisbane and Sydney, also in Los Angeles. The business is going very, very quickly, and I'm very excited by it. When I go back and think, why did I start Dash Brands? As a consultant, I'd seen in China, receivables were a big, big deal. You're always waiting for your money. I wanted to get into a cash business. And the great thing about a quick service restaurant is they have to pay you for the sandwich or the pizza before you give it to them. So we never had a receivables issue. But what I guess my experience, I've sort of already said it, is you end up having to spend a lot of money to grow the business. You raise $150 million because every time you open a store, it's a couple $100,000. So there's a lot of pressure on you to consistently have that capital. And to build out China, to build the possibly 10,000 restaurants you need in China, you'd almost, by the time you will have strong enough free cash flow to really support your investment, you're going to be a long way down the road. So that's sort of the capital demand of that business is really high. So for my new business, I still wanted cash, but I wanted a capital light business. And travel really is taking off. The demographics are just right. It's really working very well. Outbound out of China, I think, is a great opportunity, as well as inbound. We don't have to spend a lot of money in the way we did it in CapEx. The cash flow is actually a really strong part of the business. So that's sort of where I came from in deciding to set up Freedom Road. As well as that, I had great experiences, particularly with Domino's, but also with Subway as a franchisee and a master franchisee. But this time around, I wanted to own the brand, and I wanted complete control over our brand, complete control over our destiny. So, having come out of a franchise system, I learned a lot, but now I want my own brand. So that's really Victoria. That would be just in a sort of a nutshell my history.
Pretty much answered like 5 of my questions already.
Great. Save some time.
Damn, I've got to think of some new ones. So actually, I think what everyone's really curious about is how you did it. So you kind of explained, what you did and a bit of the why. But what I think everyone wants to know is like, how did you successfully bring a brand like Domino's and Subway into China? I know you touched on it briefly, but we would love to know more about the process.
Sure.
And the ugly, the unsexy side of it too. And
Well, the big secret is that these brands, all brands, need great partners in China. And when they found a partner they felt they could really rely on to both execute and also be transparent and accountable over time, they were very keen to be a partner. And that was the same for both of the brands. So we were fortunate to have been able to buy Subway and demonstrate some competence and build trust with that brand. So they wanted me to go to Shanghai. But how did we do it? When we started with Subway, and the same thing happened with Domino's, 99% of the customers we had when we bought Subway were expats. They were Australians and Americans and Brits, French, German, that liked Subway and they wanted something familiar in a strange environment. By the time we sold out of Subway, 98% of our customers were local. The business has grown way beyond the scale of the expat communities, and we've been able to localise and really target the profile of the taste while keeping the core menu sort of true to the brand. But we really grew it by targeting local Chinese customers, but absolutely in the case of Subway, and then later in Domino's it was the same. We used the expats to give us a little bit of a leg up and to sort of get us some initial volumes in certain areas where we knew there'd be more expats. And then we pointed the brand more at locals, and now we would serve, in both brands, now there would be 20 times as many expats as there was then. But the business has grown scale such that they're a relatively small proportion of the business.
Something just jumped to me. So in terms of, you mentioned the expats and then the locals. What about the price points? And because, with expats you can probably charge a lot more. With the locals, their income is a little bit different. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, that's a great question, and it's sort of part of the evolution of sort of income growth. So the ability to purchase by, so we say, the typical Beijing or Shanghai consumer in 2005 versus 2015 or now, I mean, income levels we all know have come right up. So that made our job easier. We had a tough time in the first years in Shanghai with Subway getting volumes over the line. We had a breakthrough in 2010 where in the Subway world, each of these franchise worlds brands have their whole lexicon of how they go about it and the terms they use, but sub of the day in the Subway system is a big deal. It's the idea of a special price sub that's discounted on a daily rotated basis. Yeah. And so we introduced I believe it was a 15 RMB sub of the day in Shanghai, and we promoted it. We'd saved all our promotional money up, and in the summer of 2010, we were smart with our marketing. We got access to 500 bus station shelters with full-size posters. We got access to train station, the Velo things, which if you've been in China, you know the Velo, you press and get coupons at train stations. Yeah. We sort of had saved it all up, and we really put our marketing out on Sub of the Day in that 2010 summer. We had about 35 restaurants at that point in Shanghai, so we were just big enough, and we had just enough money, and incomes had just got to the point where our volumes per restaurant, from the beginning of that summer, they went from, I believe it was 800 to 2100 by the end of the summer. And it just really punched through. And it was that particular marketing initiative and just sort of waiting. So incomes had got to the point where they could bear our prices. And, we were big enough, and we targeted the product at the local market.
But how did you know, that was the right time to do it? And how did you know that, rather than spacing out, that marketing, you aggressively did it just over that
Because
summer?
we didn't want to mess around piecemeal. We did test marketing on a smaller scale, but we wanted to come in with big. We also knew from pricing. We knew the Big Mac price point. We knew KFC, what they were doing, and they were really spending a lot of time around 12 RMB, 14 RMB. So we were a bit above that, and we could see that we were just getting within. We hadn't been able to do 15 RMB up till then. We felt we were close enough that we could offer a valid point of alternative, and actually we were right. It was a very similar story later on with Domino's, but we didn't launch Domino's till a number of years later, so incomes were already much higher. And really the story with Domino's is that, as I mentioned to you earlier, if we try to launch a delivery brand, and actually Domino's did launch in Beijing in '95, and it stayed small for years. I believe they didn't have the right strategy at the time, their partners. Not to be critical, I just think it was too early for them. But the idea of doing delivery in the 90s, where it was still very much in China, it was about going out, was about a large group of friends and family. It was very social, or you ate at home and your family cooked. Lifestyle's changed over the 20 years to the point where there's a lot of professionals that have the same issues we all have. We get home tired, we're hungry, we want something quick.
Yeah.
That wasn't an issue 20 years ago. And incomes are 2 to 3 times, disposable incomes, a multiple of what they were at that period. So the opportunity for, I believe, the turning point where delivery food became a real economic proposition in just Shanghai and Beijing, different in second tier cities, was 07, 08. That's when that was the point of inflection where it could really work. Pizza Hut delivery launched, I recall, was in 08. And we did our big drive with delivery from 2012 onwards. And we've taken it to PHD, Pizza Hut delivery, and I believe, we've really done very, very well in the market. The volumes that we're now seeing, I just saw the sales report with Domino from China, and it's all-time highs now. It's absolutely phenomenal business. So it's a question of time.
Okay, very, very good. So I guess that kind of goes into the changes in Chinese consumer tastes.
Yep.
And what are your observations of these changes, and how have Subway and Domino's really? You just touched on it briefly just now on the rise of the middle class as well.
Yep. Rising incomes have informed changes in taste as they would anywhere.
Yeah.
So QSR, quick service restaurant. When I arrived in China in '93, '94. It was a premium option. You'd go in a KFC, it was like the family would come and eat at KFC. It was a big deal. Whereas now KFC is treated in China just like it's treated here. It's great, but it's QSR. And so it's sort of relatively declined in its positioning in the market.
But the product is the same. It's just that the
product's better.
Yeah, the product's better.
Actually,
but there's just so much more options.
There's
now.
so many more choices.
Yeah.
Income levels, players in the market. It's a much more sophisticated consumer base now, relative to both Western food and Chinese food. So it's KFC came in and McDonald's, and they almost had it easy because the novelty of being there, and they had the funds to finance pretty quick rollouts.
Yeah.
So I think income levels, choice. For the franchise brands we dealt with, it was always important as part of the brand to have the integrity of having their core menus, or the BMT, the tuna, the meatball. But we were able to develop Subway, sandwiches that were specific to China. They were great for us, and we've done the same with Domino's. But it's actually pizza sells anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
India, China, Bulgaria, Australia. Actually, if you execute well, execute extremely well on the quality of your product, the quality of your service, your accountability to your customer, speed of delivery, and you have a reasonable price point, you will succeed. For the most part, with any of the strong global brands, and we demonstrated that over time. Whereas when we started, the perception was that people in China could never eat sandwiches; they would only eat rice and noodles. And this whole sort of received wisdom. We then saw Starbucks come in, and I remember Starbucks launching in '99. And again, it was, this will never work. Chinese people will only drink tea. Well, how many Starbucks are there in China now?
You tell us.
Well over 1,000, almost 2,000.
There's one on every corner.
Exceptional execution has succeeded for them. So it's a great story.
And it's not really about necessarily the coffee drinking. It's about the atmosphere. It's a place to talk business, and it's
well, that's the brand. That's one of the core equities of that brand.
Yeah.
And so my own experience in China is that you have to have the right proposition, but execution is a huge part of success. A lot of the received wisdom we were told, culturally, what would and wouldn't work. You have to take a step back and be pretty clear-eyed. Some things actually really won't work there, and I can tell you a lot of stories of products that didn't work, and getting ahead of the market. But absolutely,
we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, where is the majority of competition from? Chinese home brands or foreign brands such as McDonald's? Are you making inroads as locals as customers?
Well, as I said, locals as customers I'll talk to Domino's because that's what we're involved in now. 99% of our customers are local. And we don't really think about expats when we're doing our planning. We're so far beyond that.
Yeah.
So it's very locally focused. Competition, wow. Well, the direct competition for Domino's is Pizza Hut. It's Papa John's. Papa John's is really fading in China. It's KFC, it's McDonald's, but it's also some of the strong local restaurant brands. So you take everything into consideration.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, having lived in China myself, if I thought of pizza, I wouldn't necessarily think of Domino's. I think of my local Italian restaurant or something. But the price point would be different.
That's an expat perspective.
Yeah, that's
That's
exactly.
an expat perspective.
Exactly.
Domino's is a challenger brand in China. Pizza Hut has 20 years experience. They've got thousands of units.
Yeah.
Around, I believe now they're almost 2,000 units. We're just getting up to 150. So where we go head to head with them, I believe we beat them, and soundly, but we're not yet at a scale where the majority of the market would have a first point of recognition on Domino's. But absolutely, given our trajectory, we will pass them.
So I know we have more questions, but
Sure.
just a little segue. You mentioned before about Chinese consumer tastes becoming more sophisticated. How would a brand like Domino's keep up with that kind of pace of the rising sophistication of the Chinese consumer palate? Because now even with coffee, yes, Starbucks is doing well, or always have a following, but a lot of people are going more into the artisan route of.
Well, I referenced Domino's in Australia, which I presume everyone here. And,
Yeah.
I mean, Domino's here in the 90s was pretty terrible pizza. But for a quick service brand now, the quality of pizza here out of Domino's is getting towards being somewhat artisanal. And so that's the trajectory as tastes here have become more sophisticated. Because in the 70s when I was growing up, no one really knew what a pizza was, whereas now it's quite specific. And similarly in China, you introduce more natural ingredients, you have more taste. Some of the pizzas we have in Shanghai and Beijing are amazing. I mean, the sort of taste profile you wouldn't see elsewhere. But they're very tuned towards the local market, and I would argue quality-wise 100 times better than what the brand was when we purchased it in 2010.
Awesome. So we have more questions. I'll try to balance between the questions up there and mine down here.
If anyone wants to stand up and ask a question, please feel free.
Feel free to
Don't be
jump in.
bound.
Yeah.
I've got a question. You said Papa John's was sleeping in China, but Domino's is doing all right. What's the difference between Domino's and what you're doing and Papa John's? Like, what's the difference between that? Like, why are they sleeping and why isn't Domino's sleeping?
I don't want to get into making negative or adversarial comments about a competitor, but I would simply say we're executing much more strongly.
Okay.
So I think also they're strategically challenged in the world of pizza. You've sort of got two choices. You're either going to be delivery or you're going to be dine-in.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of dine-in, so in the case of Pizza Hut, they actually bifurcated the brand. They've got a delivery brand and they've got a dine-in brand. And the Pizza Hut dine-in brand in China, it's what we would call a fast casual, very big floor plates, probably a higher end offering than Pizza Hut has anywhere else in the world. And then they've got the delivery brand, which is at a cheaper price point, and you can't eat in there. It's all about delivery. Domino's is about delivery. We don't really do dine-in. You can have a pizza in the restaurant, but really it's just like having a delivery, but you happen to eat it in the restaurant rather than home. Whereas Pizza Hut dine-in is real dine-in. Papa John's has tried to do both out of the same restaurant. And I think fundamentally, wherever pizza chains have tried to do both worldwide, they end up doing neither very well. And I think that's a strategic trap they've fallen into. They've probably had some issues with franchising and I'd say product offer, but I'd roll that all up into execution. I do believe executionally they have issues. So they've really been going backwards as a brand in the last few years. So I sort of see the two leaders amongst the foreign brands as probably Domino's and Pizza Hut. Certainly in store volumes per store, they're the two leaders. So.
There's a good question up there about franchising. So how did the franchising work in China? What's the startup cost for a franchisee, i.e. Subway, and the loyalty / mark contribution taken as a percentage of revenue?
Okay, well, franchising is particularly interesting in the context of current happenings in Australia. And it's very disconcerting to see some of the issues here. We don't franchise for Domino's, it's only owned restaurants, and that was a deliberate business model decision. In the case of Subway, we had 35, actually I think we had 45 franchisees. They were owning anything from 1 to 5 stores. It costs, in the Subway system, and while we were involved, it cost $10,000 US to buy your first franchise, and it cost about $110,000 US for the whole thing, to open a store. It would be more now. So that was the cost.
That was in 06.
Well, we left the brand in 10, so
Okay.
6 or 7 years ago.
And how long does the franchise agreement last?
I recall it's 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is in China at the time. It's probably different in Australia now. It was a very strong system. Look, our whole ethos was we had to show our franchisees that we could do it and make money before we could ask them to try and do it. So we opened a number of restaurants around Shanghai that we believe were executed at a very high level, that were profitable, that were absolutely adherent to all brand standards. And then we said, you go and do it. And we wanted them to make money. So we really tried to put them in a position to win, and we treated them as equals. And we developed a very positive culture. And I believe our franchise community in Shanghai at the time was very, very successful. Only of the number of franchisees I just mentioned, we'd see the weekly results, only one of them wasn't making money. And because they were making money, they were willing to listen to us. But if we didn't have the platform where we could say we're doing it, if they weren't making money, it would have been different.
You had to prove it to them first.
Especially as it's a foreign brand, there's a little bit of us and them because we're sort of foreign looking and so forth. So we had to make sure we're making it look very much and not just say it, but do it. We're equal. We're treating you as an equal, and we want you to win. And that was our ethos, and it was very successful. And it was commercially, not only successful, but commercially successful for the brand. So that's my experience of what works in franchising.
All right. So now, kind of moving away a little bit, how did you manage to raise $100 million, and how did you get Macquarie on board?
Well, the second relates to the first.
Okay. And I'll let you delve into that.
Frank brought in what he at the time called, and now I would call them, friends and family, to raise that first the $3 million, and there was a lot of people putting $50,000 or $100,000 in, including myself, and Frank put a lot more than that in actually. And we then went out and raised probably another 20 million on the same basis. So for a friends and family sort of platform, we went a long way. We ended up having a number of people on the board that were very active in fundraising. So we had that sort of friends and family group that was Australia, New Zealand and US. So the great thing about Dash, I've always enjoyed, it's always been very evenly split between Australia and the US, between the brands, the management and the investors. We were involved with a number of Australian brands, Boost Juice and Glory Jeans for a while. And so we built the company on that basis for a number of years. We got to the point where we wanted to raise institutional money. We found it hard to get the right partner. I remember one of our first discussions was with a private equity group out of the US that had an office in Shanghai, and they were very friendly, but their business model was adversarial. And they wrote ratchets into the agreement where if we didn't perform at certain levels, they would ratchet up and we would go down. And to my mind and to Frank's mind, that just would create a negative relationship across the board table. And if you've got a negative relationship and culture at board level, that's going to spread to the rest of the company. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
So you had that foresight when you...
Culture is so important. Everything I've done in business is about culture, about treating people with respect. You create the culture that you want to convey, that your customers see. You create that in your company. You live it yourself. If you're going to ask people to adhere to a culture, you have to be an exemplar of it yourself. And if you're willing to do that, people will follow you, because people will want to follow something that's worthy, so long as it's commercial. And that had to also apply at boardroom. And actually with our brand partners. And one of the issues I probably had ultimately with franchising is there were times where I felt the culture, particularly on the Subway side, was quite different to what the culture we internally wanted to promote. But anyway, we sort of raised the monies we did, and there were a couple of groups we had good conversations with, but I felt, and Frank felt, were probably not going to be the right fit. I happen to know Richard Young, who's an Australian who's been with Macquarie as long as I've been in China. And I'd been chairman of Auscham in Shanghai for a few years. And I was just stepping down, having my farewell thanks dinner, and Richard happened to be there, and we got to talking about what we were doing and raising money. And that turned into him introducing me to the managing director, well, actually their investment committee. I met the various members of the investment committee over the next few months. They went into DD with us, I recall it was in that August. They finished DD in December, and we closed in late January. So it was a reasonably, it was quite an intense process.
Yeah.
A lot of funny things happened. We took one of the senior IC guys into one of our new restaurants in Shanghai, and we didn't know this was going to happen, but we'd had an order for 200 pizzas that morning, and we walked into the restaurant, there's pizza boxes lined, and they're going crazy trying to set, and we actually had a busy lunch, and he's looking at me and going, "This is just a setup." It wasn't. It was a fortunate relationship. Sometimes things just sort of go your way a bit. And my own experience with Macquarie as a business partner, they have been and remain an exceptional business partner for us. It's been very positive. So they made an initial placement and subsequent placements. Their assistance to us went a long way beyond the financial side. They've contributed senior team members and improved operations, and they've been a great partner for us.
And how many years has that partnership gone on for?
Oh, I think they came in 2012. It'd be a 5-year relationship at this point. So we've had other institutional investors, and that's how we ended up sort of raising the money we have so far.
And what do you think really contributed to them wanting to, invest in what you're doing?
Fundamentally, they wanted to be in the consumer space in China. They could see the play, the rising incomes, and so forth. Domino's success globally. There's a listed Domino's master franchisee in India that has got some great numbers, and that sort of great analogue case for us to show them. And there are other Domino's partners globally, and you could just see delivery taking off. So the business model, and then I think they gained a degree of confidence in their ability to execute. So they were the two key. Probably just timing. Probably a year earlier or maybe a year later it wouldn't have been for them, but it was the right time.
So there's a lot of different factors here. Mix of timing, a bit of.
But that we sort of made our good luck because we had the right brand and we were executing well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I believe that's what got us the
I think
opportunity.
the word execution is really key. You keep bringing that up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without doubt, anyone in business knows there's a degree of luck in everything, despite all intent and execution, purpose.
Yeah, we have a question.
Sure.
It's really impressive, and I actually was one of your first customers in Beijing for your subway.
Oh, thank you. It was nice to see you again.
Yeah, I'm in Beijing in the 90s.
Okay.
I worked in the British company, and we always get your subway for lunch. Anyway, it's amazing, what happened since then. My question to you is that you said that you have to have a local partner in China to do anything. So is that something you do from the very start? And what are you looking for in terms
Well, I never said that.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
No, when I was at Deloitte, I spent enough time helping companies do breakups of joint ventures that hadn't worked. And I remember particularly Boral, the Australian company, and how unpleasant it was. And I made my own decision that I wouldn't do a JV at that point. So I've always done wholly owned, and I've always worked with exceptional team members and business partners that I've always felt sort of owning and having a fairly simple ownership structure where all shareholders come in at the same top company level and have equal rights, but there's clear governance, you've got a strong board that's very transparent and accountable. That's how I like to do business. When you get involved with a joint venture, particularly one where it may not be just due to the corporate structure and regulatory, might not always be as clear as it could be. Ambiguity I try to avoid. And I'd say that if I was in China or if I was in any other country, just as a matter of principle for me.
David, quick question on that, joint ventures. You see a lot of companies going into China, working with Chinese counterparts, they're entering into a joint venture partner. It's often also advised by many. What are your thoughts on, for instance, in different industries, on the use of a Chinese joint venture partner?
Well, I'm not as current on the regulatory requirements because obviously in some industries you have to do JV. I'd say in the first instance in the 90s, it was a matter of trust that you did a JV because no one really knew anything about China. So a lot of JVs, just because that was the only way you could sort of get the know-how. We've come a long way since then. So where it wasn't required by regulatory sort of guidance, I would not suggest doing a joint venture. I would suggest getting your partners, Chinese, Australian, American, to invest at the same level and create a simple ownership structure. I think we've well and truly moved beyond the JV model. But if you are in a regulatory space that requires JV, be very careful in understanding your partner and particularly understanding both their motivation and their method of doing business, but what they want to get out of the business, and make sure it's aligned with yours. Because if it's not aligned, and particularly if your values are too divergent, it'll end in tears. But if you do have the alignment, I mean, there are lots of stories of successful JVs where everyone's been happy. It can work, but you just need to be very careful up front. Just as I'd say that if it was in Indonesia, Australia, or anywhere else. So I don't think that's specific to China.
Justin's got a question.
Hi David, thanks for your time. I wanted to take a slightly different tack and start talking about travel, what you're doing now with free remote travel. So
Sure.
you said earlier there were a couple of reasons why you got into start free remote travel. And one of those I think was that the trends were right for it about 3 years ago. What trends in particular were you looking at that
Not necessarily 3 years ago. I would just say, that was when I started, yeah.
Right.
Well, obviously, if you look at outbound volumes out of China, 120, 125, million a year, and likely to grow. And the proportion, that number's a big number, and a big part of that number is just Hong Kong, China back and forth, but it's still very, very significant. And an increasing proportion of Chinese travellers are FIT versus when I first got to China.
What's an FIT, mate?
Okay, FIT is free independent traveller. It's if I wanted to, me and my wife wanted to go to Shanghai and travel for a week and come back, and we did it by ourselves, we're FIT. Whereas where we join a group and we're part of 20 people going on a guided tour, that's group travel. Group travel was what China travel was all about, domestic and probably outbound for a long time, but now FIT is more and more important and the overall number is huge. But I'm particularly focused on inbound. The inbound volumes in China are very large, and of the inbound volumes, you've got 15 to 20 million a year that are coming from Western Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand. And we don't believe that they're catered for with a great deal of focus by the current operators. So they're high margin, well-informed travellers, well-informed about global offerings, but generally not that well-informed about what they can really do in China. So we're providing inbound travellers with, I believe, a richer opportunity set, better execution than what we've seen. And it's a really rich market that's not really spoken about very much. Everyone talks about outbound. The problem with outbound as a foreign invested company is it's extremely hard to get the license. We don't yet have an outbound license. We have a license to do business events, so what in the industry is called MICE, meetings, incentives, conferences. We can do outbound for that, but not for FIT. So we'd like to think we'll be able to get the outbound license within a reasonable period. So at the moment we're focused on inbound, and it's proving very good for us, and we're doing business event outbound as well, and that's amazing as well.
So is your vision for free remote travel 50-50 kind of split in the future?
Actually, I'd say in the course of time, outbound's likely to dominate.
What about the outbound license? Some people suggested to buy a license from another company.
Yeah.
Buy a license. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I won't go further in talking about our plans. I don't want to sort of put too much out, but there are a number of opportunities. And I believe there will be opportunities for more foreign invested companies to get outbound licenses.
There was a question.
Please.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
One more question.
Just regarding you mentioned that the institution is very important. Do you agree with that? Yeah. Company execution is very important. One thing I just would like to know, how do you feel about the price, the competition competition on price. Do you think that China is a very price sensitive market?
It's amazingly price sensitive, but it depends what part of the market you're going for. So the big volumes at this part of the market, it's more or less extremely price driven. But what we're seeing is that there's an emerging FIT customer that's much more choosy about what they want and more willing to pay for a genuine experience.
And that's because China is still very price sensitive.
Extremely price sensitive.
So how do you tackle this problem?
It's like all things. You've got to offer you've got to offer something that's reasonably priced. But if you offer something that gives better service and is a unique destination, you'll still be able to. We're so small at the moment that a very small part of the China market in that higher end is still going to be a big deal for us.
That's a problem. That's a question that's really bothered me for more than 1 year.
Yeah.
Finally, I think I find the kind of the answer to this question. I think for me, at least for me, I feel if the price difference is within 3%, possibly that's more efficiency and other things, quality of service is more important. It's more kind of decision, factor. But if the price is difference is more than 3%, price will win.
I would argue, if you look at this as the market where this is lower price and this is sort of more luxury, I would argue that in the lower segment, the difference couldn't be more than 1%.
Okay. Yeah.
Middle of the market, 3%. Up here, 15%.
Yeah, that's the
20%.
But we're targeting the middle.
If you're in the middle,
Yeah.
So I'd be very interested to have a further discussion with you though.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. So, moving on to, I think we can maybe we can always come back to Dash and Freedom Road, but what I'd want to know more about your personal how you balance everything and who's helped you along the way as well. I'm sure your path to where you got it now, you didn't do it alone. So who were the mentors that helped you along the way, and what is your motto and mantra?
Yeah, it's great. Well, just mentors. I'll mention a few. Frank Krasavec, who originally was the angel and then became our company chairman, was a real business mentor to me, particularly in the fundraising side of things. I'd never been involved in that, and just sort of general with governance. He was a great mentor. A number of our other directors. Andrew Jemson, who's the CFO, really runs the finances for the railway real estate empire in Australia. He's been on the board of Domino's for 10 years and has just joined me on the board of Freedom Road. So he's a great mentor for me. Michael Johnson, who helped me start the Domino's Dash business, was an amazing partner for me for many years.
And you met them in Australia or China?
When I was in China. So I've had a number of people that have really helped me along the way. And my current business partner, David Summich, he previously had built a national travel business in Australia from nothing and had great success. So we have really aligned values, very complementary skill sets. And me coming with the China side and fundraising and so forth, and him travel operations, where we've got an amazing business partnership. So being with the right people and being able to sort of learn through them it's been key to the extent I've had successes.
It's interesting that your mentors actually were your business partners as well, because not everyone would be lucky enough to or be able to work with their mentors, and you have.
Yeah.
And I imagine that they were they much older than you or more experienced?
Frank was, but the others not necessarily. Andrew's certainly a bit older and a bit more experienced. But to be honest, I've had partnerships. I've been involved with people that it's been terrible. It's been catastrophic. I mean, I've lost millions of dollars because of bad partnership selection.
Yeah, actually, this is a great segue to talk about, what's been the difficulties of your path, because I know that, whenever we talk, we have these talks here, and it's really easy to talk about, how you got here, who's helped you along the way, but really, what setbacks have you had, and what have you learned from these setbacks and challenges?
In the early days of fundraising for Dash, it was really hard, and getting Subway to break through, at times it just seemed impossible. The first 2 years, the brand really, the volumes went from sort of 350 from a restaurant up to 500. But then it moved quickly, and very similar with Domino's. So in the early days, it was very, very, very hard. But there's always a point of inflection with the business. So really, the lesson I've had: persistence, vision, confidence, drive, and unrelenting commitment. Respecting the people you're with. Of course, they'll really work with you through those difficulties, and at the end of the day, the success you have together is very rewarding. There are numerous setbacks. We would sign leases that would be dishonoured, or would take a year to negotiate because the different party factions in the Shanghai government would all have to come in, and we had some terrible times. Or you'd have a restaurant, and it's the local health official would come in and demand a 20,000 fine and close you down, and this sort of thing. That doesn't happen anymore, but there was a period where we went through that. It was an evolving business environment. It was quite unstructured in the early days, particularly of Dash Brands.
Yeah, and there's a question that just popped up so how important is social media? And you mentioned,
For Domino's, social media is huge.
Yeah, and PR.
I just saw the latest numbers. The customer database for Domino's in China is now more than 35 million. And we drive WeChat very hard.
Yeah.
And that's become a really, really major sales channel for us in the last 2 years. So the thing about a delivery pizza business is you know where your customers live, right?
It's creepy.
And you sort of know all their details, and you can profile the consumption patterns really well with a good CRM.
Yeah.
So the ability to do that specific social media right at their preferences.
It helps you target.
Absolutely
Yeah,
powerful.
right.
And so really there's been a huge amount of work within the Domino's brand over the last 2 to 3 years on that side of things. And as social media has become so dominant over the same period, we've really benefited. We can quite specifically say that the extent to which weekly sales volume increases are due to different specific initiatives, which I haven't been involved in another business where it's so clear how sales have been driven.
Why is it clearer for, say, Domino's?
Because of the ownership we have of customer data.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And
Yeah.
not every business that.
And also social media, WeChat, they'll use that channel to buy, and so forth. We have EDM, we have telephone, we've got a number of sales channels and ordering channels, so it's very easy to link particular sales activity with specific marketing initiatives.
It's easier than brick and mortar, just brick and mortar.
Well, it's clearer.
It's clearer.
There's a lot more clarity as to where volumes are coming from, whereas brick and mortar, it's a little bit of a finger to the wind.
Yeah.
Why'd they walk into the
It's
store?
more anecdotal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Okay, and what is your motto and mantra? To a lot of the aspiring entrepreneurs here, people who want to understand more about entering the Chinese market or successfully localizing.
Only become an entrepreneur if you have a real passion for it. If you're just doing it because it sounds like a good idea, or intellectually it appeals to you, don't do it, because it's going to take a lot more than you're willing to give. It has to be a passion. It has to be a vocation. You really have to have a clear vision that you stick to. Persistence and drive is so important. Even on the bad days where everything goes wrong, keep going. And your ability to keep going in the face of adversity will inspire those around you to keep working. I know for a fact that through some of the toughest times, if I've got one thing going for me, I don't give up. And my ability to stay the course kept other people working strongly in tough times.
So setting a good example.
Yeah, and also being commercial and realistic, knowing when to let go. You can try things so many times, but sometimes you have to take your licks and step away. So that the sort of the judgment around that, the commercial judgment, is really important.
Great.
Questions?
Yeah, sure.
One more thing.
Yeah.
People matter. People matter all around the business. If you've got respect for people, you can really work.
Just on the note of people, how many people were you managing? When you were at Dash, and then now at Freedom Road, and
Well, Dash was we probably had a senior management team of it ended up being hundreds and then thousands of people at restaurant level, but amongst the executive team, we probably generally had about a dozen senior managers in the leadership team. The freedom rate at this stage is much smaller, so I'd say we have 4 or 5 key people that I work with including David and myself. So it's smaller at this stage, but it will be bigger over time. So I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Back to your franchise. So what's the royalty rate, and do you charge your royalty based on turnover or on net profit?
I don't think I should disclose royalties. Well, actually, it's probably public. The franchise royalty for Domino's is, including the franchise advertising fee fund, was 8%.
8%. Okay.
So
on turnover or net profit?
net turnover.
Oh,
It's high. That's one of the highest in the industry. That includes the advertising fund as well as the royalty. So it's a gross of that. I'm not going to go into the Domino's because I believe that's commercial.
And usually, typically, how long does it take for the franchisee to get break even? How many years?
Well, it's to get break even.
Yeah.
Frankly, you'd want to get break even within your first 6 months.
First 6 months.
Or 12 months. I mean,
that's great.
I'm talking, there's payback and there's break even.
Yeah.
You don't want to be trading a loss in a restaurant for, more than that. Usually, our experience was, you have your opening, usually there'll be a big volume and it'll come back. You'll have a low second and third month because they've tried it and they come, and then you build your marketing and you get, so 6 months to 12 months, you sort of get your steady state volume. So, you want it to be viable. And you're sort of looking at a payback in your capital investment in 2 to 3 years. Certainly less than 3 years is so different brands, different markets. I haven't operated restaurants in Australia, so it might be quite different here.
Okay, so one last question here, and then I have one last one, and then I think we'll finish.
Sure. Okay.
So going back to culture of your board, were there any other ways that you made sure that your board was transparent in everything that was going on, and also how you made sure that there was a positive culture in your company?
Okay, well, for the board, we ended up having a pretty large number of these friends and family investors, 50 or 60, and they were generally people who were personal friends or well known to various directors. So disclosure and transparency was really important. We put out quarterly reports that had the numbers, and we actually did a bit of a newsletter around it. And so for the size of the company, I think the activity we expended in that area was quite high. Of course, the number of investors we had involved. So it was always, and then with the franchise partner brands, you had to be transparent with them. So we had so many stakeholders at those various sites. We had to be very transparent. And culture, I mean, we had monthly parties in our office, and the HR office would come with amazing games, and it just got everyone really happy and relaxed. We tried to recognise success with bonuses. We tried to be open to criticism, and generally the guy making the sandwich or the pizza knows a lot more about it than you, so you should presume, and sort of, he might not even have been in the business that long, but trying to be open-minded in that respect. That just comes back to, we always had as one of our values respect, and that's, you treat people like you want to be treated yourself, and if you stick with that, then that'll get you most of the way there.
Awesome. So just finishing question. This is like a more personal question, just because for someone to do what you do, it mustn't be easy, and you've come a long way, and just want to know what a typical day for you looks like, and how do you balance your life as CEO and
Well, to be honest, I was in China for 24 years, and that's a long time.
Yeah.
I grew up here in the Northern Beaches, and I'm sort of used to a certain. But I loved China, and I just got such a thrill. I loved travelling in China. So during my years there, I would always travel to the mountains of Sichuan or Yunnan. And that was my release. I swam physically, kept in good shape. I ate well, and friends, and the social life in a city like Shanghai can be amazing.
The nightlife.
Nightlife and social life.
Yeah.
I mean, just the richness of sort of the mix of people can be. But I got to the point where, you know, those sort of charms had lost some of their appeal, and I was ready to sort of almost get back to my roots, and particularly nature, sort of slightly more grounded based. So
how many years did you hit before you hit that point of, I'm over this, I need to go back?
I had a health issue about 6 years ago. It was not related to stress or anything, it was just something that happened, certain demographic experiences. So that probably forced me to reconsider a few things.
Yeah.
I knew at that, I probably would have gone back then, except I knew I wanted to start Freedom Road, and I knew I had to start Freedom Road in China. So I stayed a few more years to get Freedom Road set up properly, as was done, and then I came back 2 years into Freedom Road's life. I've been here for 6 months, and so that was sort of the timing decision. And now it's easy to balance, because I just pick up my surfboard when I get home every night, go for a surf, sort of answers most of the questions.
You had to do the grunt work in China on the ground before, you know, you can have the life that we have now here.
Possibly. Well, I would say that it wouldn't have been as easy to set Freedom Road in Shanghai up unless I was there and we really got the core team in place. And
exactly, yeah.
To try to do it remotely, I feel in travel, those foreign invested companies that are involved in travel have all done it as a flag planning exercise, and the offices of foreign travel companies in China are all remote offices of people that are just sent in and out. Not many of them are really generically based in China and understand the China market. Obviously, local travel agents do, but I'm talking foreign investors. So I believe we really understand China at a fundamental level and have a relationship with it that very few other travel companies have. And that's a legacy of starting the company in China. And that's why I decided to do it in that way. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And, you know, tonight's been really insightful from different perspectives, you know, from the Dash Brands perspective, and then you've got Freedom Road, and then from the franchise. I think a lot of people were interested in the franchise side of things and a lot of the technical things as well, and you also, you know, talked about the challenges, which is it's all very real, and you ended up with a really positive note on, you know, it's not all fun and it is not all fun and games, but, you know, you balanced it in a certain way. Have your own hobbies and your lifestyle, and that's important to you, and you've made that a priority because life gets in the way. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone found it really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks so much.